And I remember first hearing that word Vipassana, I just lit up. I went, I want to do that.
At that time, many people were traveling overland, like there was a bus going from London to Delhi. Yeah, dream bus, you know. People stoned off their head most of the time, very psychedelically painted, but you could take this bus, and I don't know, it took a month or so to get there.
Arrived in India, Wagah, on the border. It was evening, and immediately when I crossed the border, I had this feeling, I'm home.
We just kept heading east, and somehow we kept finding ourselves in opportune junctions where it made sense to keep heading east. This was now getting too late in the year to go overland to India, so the next option was maybe a ship out of Kuwait City might take us to Bombay.
I met this person on the street, and he said, well, the last thing I did in India this time was a course with this man called Goenka. You have to do one of these courses.
We can call them hippie students, but certainly these were people from all over the world, mostly the Western world, who were clearly looking for something. In America at that time was the time of the Vietnam War. So think of all of these young people, these young leftist, liberal, radical young kids who didn't want to have anything to do with the war. And one of the reasons I left the country and went to Israel, and when I got to Israel, they wanted me to join their army. I said I wasn't going to join the American army, I'm certainly not going to join this army, and that's when I left. But there were thousands and thousands of these Western people on the road going to India, not really knowing what they were looking for. This was the days of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. Clearly it was a magical mystery tour, and the fortuitous events of many different spiritual paths. People meeting their teachers, meeting their gurus. It was an amazing time in India. We actually got to Bodh Gaya. The last place we stopped to look for a place to stay was the Burmese Vihara. The Burmese Vihara was instrumental in my life. Munindra was there, so Munindraji was my first teacher. And then one night, about 2 months later, Munindraji came upstairs and he said, my friend S.N.Goenka is coming tomorrow to teach a 10-day course, and he wanted all of us to sit. I said, great. The next day, Goenkaji walked in, and as soon as he walked in, everything changed. And he had come for one course to Bodh Gaya, and he stayed for, I remember 5, the book says 4. But I can't remember much, so 4 it is. And we stayed and sat all those courses. It was remarkable that this man from Burma, who knew nobody, and all of these Western people, it was like a magnet being drawn to Bodh Gaya at the time, so it was incredible. His first course in English was a few months earlier up in Dalhousie. There was a couple there from San Francisco who had been cooks in the old Haight-Ashbury district in the hippie days. They came to India and they were looking for something. So they wrote to 13, I think it was 13 different living Buddhist masters at the time. Sayagyi U Ba Khin was one of those masters. He wrote back to them saying that my teaching representative in India is S.N.Goenka, and at the same time, the story I always heard was he wrote to Goenkaji saying, you go up to Dalhousie and teach those people, which he did. He said he was so unsure of his English that he started the discourses in the evening. He said the first discourse, 20 minutes. I think second discourse, 20 minutes. He said by the time day 3 happened, 1 hour, no problem. So, that was the beginning of his English career. The course was obviously very successful. All 13 of those people followed him to Delhi where he did the second course in English. And all of those people came to Bodh Gaya, which is when I met Goenkaji. And by the time I met him, the discourse is not so different than what they are now. His English and his mannerisms in English were so wonderful and so endearing that you just wanted to hear them over and over again. And we did.
So eventually I made my way to Dalhousie, where I took my first course. And at that time there were 3 courses in a row held at the Grand View Hotel. And Goenkaji's assistant at that time was a man named Judla, who was taking the registration for all of us. And, the Westerners would sort of come in by train and trudge up to his house, and he'd write our names down. And he was very interested in our stories. And he said, well, have you done any meditation before? And I said, well, not really. I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead or something, and I just really haven't done much. And he said, I think you'll really like this technique. I think you'll really practice this. And I said, that sounds good, but I think I'll only do one course. He said, no, you do all three. I said, okay. So my very first 3 courses were 3 courses right in a row. And it was an amazing experience.
My question was, how long do you have to sit? She goes, well, you have to sit an hour, and then there's one time you have to sit actually 2 hours. And I'm thinking to myself, ooh, all right, somehow I'll do this. Right? So this is in the back of my mind as we're coming into Madras now. As the course is coming up, we're in this hotel somewhere. And I said, okay, let me see just how long I can sit cross-legged. So I get myself on the bed. I'm going to try to sit cross-legged for as long as I can. I got 12 minutes. And I dissolved in a great deal of pain from the 12 minutes. So I said, well, okay, I'll just do the best I can.
Another thing, a feature in the 10-day courses was that in the evening at 9 o'clock, they served hot milk and 2 cookies for everybody. Now, I was in a big fix because I wanted that milk and those cookies, but I also wanted to listen to Goenkaji's question and answers. So in those days, the seating was a bit fluent. So after the discourse, I would always place myself near the door, and the final sitting is over, Bhavatu Sarvalang, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I was out of the door, down the steps, down at the milk pot first, get my milk, get my cookies, wrap it all up, and zip, before half the students were out, I was up again, and right in the front to listen to Goenkaji's answering questions.
So the place was a Muslim mosque way out in the countryside. No running water, no electricity. The rooms didn't have flooring, it was just beaten earth. And the roof was just tiles without anything else, so that when I looked up at the roof at night, I could see the stars through it. And I piled whatever clothes I had on top of me. It was a desert, so it was cool. And I thought this was wonderful. I loved it. The course amazed me. I couldn't believe how much pain I had. And I thought that if I could sit high enough, somehow I would be above the pain. Well, so I would pile up my clothes to sit on in the hall because I had nothing else. To see Goenkaji answering questions on a course live, I think I learned as much from that as anything else. You would see people approach him, and as soon as they approached him, they started smiling. You know, they just started glowing as they came towards him. And sometimes they would come up deliberately to challenge him. During one of the sittings, a meditator, a man, he came into the hall and was approaching Goenkaji, shouting and waving his arms. You know, he came closer and closer, and Goenkaji just sat there, smiling and chanting softly. And that was all Goenkaji did. But it looked to me that here was this man trying to attack Goenkaji, and you know, Goenkaji wasn't afraid in the slightest. There was no sign of fear. There was just peacefulness and compassion. And that proved to me that there is something about this man and about what he teaches.
He was a simple teacher in that he just taught the Dhamma. That's all he was interested in. He wasn't interested in getting followers. You know, when he said, come to Benares, I know it was because he knew I needed more guidance and practice or whatever it was, right? So it wasn't that he was trying to get people under his clutches in any way like that. And, you know, he was very, in those days, you know, you could try and take a picture of him and he'd kind of shun you, you know, or laugh it off and say, what are you going to do with the picture, you know? How's that going to help you?
Goenka was clearly a businessman. He sat with short-sleeved, button-down kind of Brooks Brothers shirt on and a lungi, and he'd read the Financial Times during break times, you know, and he was walking around with everybody else. It was hard for me because I was the Peace Corps director, and here were all these really disheveled people, some of them barely covered, you know, and he didn't bat an eyelash at all. It was just, these are his students. About 2 or 3 weeks after the course, when I was back in Kathmandu, I got a check in the mail for like 14 rupees, which was like $1.50, because the course did not cost as much as they thought it was going to cost. And I thought, so that really made me stop and think, this is the real deal. Okay, I understood the technique, Goenka was available, there was no gurudom, and it's not about money.
I remember in my first courses, the bell ringer used to wake up all the women by going into their rooms, ringing the bell, and if they didn't get up, he would tickle their feet. There were people giving each other massages. There was lots of things happening that I don't even want to know what might have been happening on those courses. But we were still oddly dedicated. I mean, we felt deeply about it. We felt strongly that this was something absolutely extraordinary and amazing, and we were dedicated to it. We were good students in our own quite astonishing way. He was very, very, very accommodating because I think he saw something. He saw that dedication and he knew that we would work hard. And he did say at some point, he said when the Indian students did start complaining a little bit about us, he said, look, these people really have a strong determination and a dedication and a virya that is exemplary. And so, you know, we have to make accommodation.
People would come and meet you. You could talk all the time if you wanted. We played cards in the first course in the room. So it used to be easy. But when the Anapan started, the room was dark. So I thought maybe Goenka ji is going to hypnotize. So I did not repeat the 5 precepts. But then he was so normal and natural that he makes everybody so comfortable.
So for first 2 days, I was not doing anything. I had no faith in him. I just wanted what sort of man he is. Because I have seen so many other saints also, which never impressed me. So I was just tasting him. And on third day when he started to observe sensation here, then it clicked. Oh, this is something most valuable thing I am missing. So then I started doing what on first day what he taught. I remembered and I started doing. Whole night I did not sleep. There was a common dormitory, yeah, and all were snoring and sleeping and I was meditating.
When Goenka first came to India, he came just by himself. A lot of the parents of young Indian women did not want to send their daughters to any of these gurus because there was a history there, history of abuse, one nature or the other. Goenka always said that when Mataji joined him, that was such a protection for him because it was also a protection for these young girls, and therefore so many Indian families started coming themselves and their daughters because there was a full protection by Mataji always being with him. The other thing that she provided was, he always said that her metta and her sensitivity was so strong. So he would be busy talking, dealing with something or the other. She'd be just sitting there practicing metta. So it was a big protection for him all the way around and a big help to the students.
He sort of demonstrated that it's possible. You don't have to be a monk or you don't have to be a recluse of any type. But he continued to encourage people to maintain their jobs, maintain their religious convictions, if you will. He was the example of householding, non-sectarian approach. Of course, he came out of a Hindu tradition, but pretty much anybody could see that you can continue to be an ordinary person having a job and doing ordinary things and still experience a deep spirituality.
It was January 71, and Goenka came into the hall for the evening group sitting, 6 to 7. He had received a telegram, and he announced the light is out in Rangoon. And that was pretty much it that day. But the next day, instead of the normal group sitting from 2:30 to 3:30, he had it, I believe it was maybe 1 to 2 instead. And throughout the entire sitting, Goenka talked. And it was very interesting to hear what he said, because he was saying things like, now they're putting the body in the fire, and the fire is consuming the body, and on like this throughout the whole thing. And at the end of the sitting, he said, the body is now fully consumed. And everybody's sitting there saying, well, how do you know that? And I asked him years later what actually had happened. And he said when they put the body in the fire, he felt his own body start burning. And it burned through the entire sitting. And at the end, he felt nothing but a cool breeze of metta. He knew that the body had been completely burned. And he also said that Sayagyi's metta for him became much stronger when Sayagyi was no longer bounded by the physical body. I mean, we all know the gratitude that Goenka had for his teacher. So even after Sayagyi's death, that connection that Goenka had with Sayagyi was so powerful. I mean, every course he taught credited Sayagyi for that course.
In October 77, I made a trip to Burma. In those days, you could get a 1-week visa. U Ba Khin had died, but his assistant, Sayama, was there. I remember for checking, the way they would do it, every evening they had a meditation hall, and at the back of the hall was a table where people would sit around and they would serve lemon water or other cold drinks. One time, Sayama translated, she said to me, you're always thinking. And of course, 100% right.
So Sayama was in India at that time. Very impressive, and we understood her to be very highly developed, and it was a very strong metta. Yes, it was a privilege to sit with Sayama.
How did it happen that this tradition, which obviously started with the Buddha and was maintained by the monks, started in India, went to Burma, but was maintained by small numbers of very serious meditators and scholars both in Burma? How did it come to flower in this unlikely form of householder tradition? I mean, that's the story of the lineage of teachers. We know now what Ledi Sayadaw's role was. We know how he passed it on to Sayataji, who had a very important role in innovating and making it accessible to people who didn't have the kind of time monks have. We know that Uba Khen was the one who then took it and opened it up using his English knowledge and his knowledge of the teachings of the Buddha to householders in a way that would fit into their life and was able to attract more sophisticated, more educated people. What Goenkaji did in India and from India to the rest of the world is just, to me, the most unlikely story. And yet we know it happened because it's still happening today. We still have these centers just crowded with students who are coming to learn this technique and taking it home and practicing it as best they can. It wasn't just Goenkaji who saw the potential in householders. Don't forget, the Ledi Sayadaw, starting with him, he saw potential. The entire chain of teachers, the lineage that we've inherited, down to Goenkaji, obviously, were focusing on householders. But the respect for the Sangha was there the entire time because everybody recognized, as I do today, that we wouldn't have what we have. We couldn't have inherited the Buddha's teaching had it not been for the Sangha, who kept maintaining both the scriptural understanding and the practical understanding down through how many generations? At least 100 generations. So how can you not have respect for the Sangha? Problem that arose in Burma was that they were afraid that the Sangha would be lost because the entire fabric of Buddhist culture had been broken during the time of the British colonial empire period. Responding to that threat is what led Ledi Sayadaw in particular to sort of turn his attention elsewhere and bring householders into the practice and into the scriptural study as well. We always heard the story from Goenkaji about his teacher, Uba Khen, before he was Sayadaji, crossing the Rangoon River on the ferry and then having to slog through muddy paddy fields to get to Pyabweji, to get to Sayataji's teaching center. And there was no special accommodations made. Nobody was picking up students at the bus stop or anything in those days. You had to work to find your teacher and to get there. Uba Khen began teaching in an interesting way. We know the story of his meeting the Webu Sayadaw in 1941, which was a chance meeting. Uba Khen had been given the job as an accountant to go out and audit the books of various railway stations. And so he had a rail car and he was riding along on the railways and he would stop and look at the books at each place and then go on and audit the books in the next place. And that's when he first saw the Webu Sayadaw, asked, "Who is that monk?" Went to meet him. Webu Sayadaw meditated all day. Uba Khen went and just sort of paid respects in front of his hut, and the door came open and out came Webu Sayadaw. "Hey, who are you?" Sayadaji explained to Webu Sayadaw how he was working. Webu Sayadaw said to him, "You must start teaching this immediately." Uba Khen had a family. He had wife and children. He had a job. He would go to his job every day. He lived the normal life of a householder in the capital city there. He would go off to work during the day. He would come at night. He would check on the students. How were they doing? And then he would go back to work the next day and so forth.
I was asking about Uba Khen. People said Uba Khen was a bodhisattva, and what did that mean exactly? This was walking along the beach in Juhu. And he told me, in the experience of meditation, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you come up to the gate. And you can peer through the bars of the gate. And you know that beyond the gate is a pool of cool water, and you even feel the coolness, but the gate doesn't open for you. And this happens once, and then it happens repeatedly, and you don't go through that gate. Then you know, at some time you took a vow to wait for the experience of nirvana until such time as another Buddha arises, or sometime. You've taken a vow of some kind, that in this life you won't experience it, you will meditate as fully and as completely as possible, serve, and that's what you're doing in this life. So that was how he explained it to me. We were talking about U Ba Khin, but I'm very, very sure he was talking about his own experience.
U Ba Khin, it seems clear in retrospect how he was training Goenkaji, even though Goenkaji says he didn't know that was going on. I think it was U Ba Khin's plan for a long time. When the opportunity came, Goenkaji needed to return to India for family reasons in '69. That's when U Ba Khin made the appointment official, wrote out the certificate saying this is a teacher appointed by me, and sent Goenkaji off with the definite mission to return Dhamma to India. He would have loved to have gone, and the best he could do, given the circumstances, the political circumstances of the time, was to teach Goenkaji as best he could and send Goenkaji off to start teaching. It was also a way of giving Goenkaji some confidence. This was, I think, a surprising idea for Goenkaji when U Ba Khin appointed him a teacher and sent him to go to India and return the Dhamma. I mean, that's a big weight to put on someone's shoulders. And so by U Ba Khin saying, "Don't worry, you're not going, I'm going," it meant you have all my support, at least that, and it would have been a confidence boost for him.
I was never aware that my teacher is training me for teachership. But much later I came to know that all the time he was grooming me for this job. Somehow or the other he thought very soon after I came in contact with him that this person has the power to carry on the work of Dhamma, which actually was told to me after Syaji passed away and after I came to India. Some of the students there, my Dhamma brothers, they told that when I was for the first time admitting the center and Syaji saw me coming, I don't know what he saw, and he said, "Here comes a person who is going to spread Dhamma. He is a man of very deep Dharma." So from the very beginning he had this in mind that he has to train me for some particular purpose, but he was a very wise person, not to allow any ego to come in my mind. So he never told me anything. After my first course, when I tried to bring more people, I was not successful immediately. It took some time. But when Indians started coming, then he used me as a translator. So I was sitting near his feet all the time. And there the Indians started. Because while translating, I was understanding more about Dhamma. I was understanding what questions people asked. And I was understanding how the teacher explains them. And like this, it moved on. Syaji at one time decided that we must go out of the center. We must go out of Burma. We are in two camps, one in Myanmar, one in Myanmar. And there he was giving me more responsibility for checking people as this teacher is now. And suddenly I was this teacher tells me, well, you are all English-speaking people. Why I should give this course and you not? You give this course. But the very talk lessons of my teacher, that was very embarrassing. And the very talk on Dhamma, still more embarrassing. He said, no, don't continue. And I really understand Hindi to some extent. He came to tell again, now we talk about Vishaka, and I changed myself to talk about Vishaka. Now we talk about Antarctica, and I changed myself. So there was like a guide with me all the time, telling what I should talk about this what I should talk about this. 10 days I learned what important things to do to the students. Of course, later on, I made my own decisions, knowing the background of the Indian students, their culture, their understanding of Dhamma, their philosophies. So all things come there in my talk so that they don't have any more questions or doubts about the teaching. So in the discourse itself covered, but the beginning was made by him.
I was working in the Myanmar government organization, and then I followed when we were Buddhist monks and Vipassana course. Then one of my Indian friends told me that we should go back in and because there we have got Indian vegetarian teacher and Goenka is involved there. And then I was like that work back and then Goenka was sometimes my guru. When Goenka came to this course in Hindi, those Indians who were not well fluent but me. So I could understand both back in this course as well as the Hindi course by Goenka. So I benefited from both sides. On the last day of our Vipassana course in June 1999, I got good news of sad news that Goenka is going to India. So on one way we are happy that he is going to India. On the other way, we are very sorry sad that we will be missing him because we love him so much. We like to be next to him every now and then. Soon after Goenka left into India, one Sunday evening we went to Myanmar Road in the meditation center. After meditation, we were sitting just in front of one and we were listening to his talk. And he started suddenly talking about Goenka. He said, now you see that my disciple Goenka has taken back the land back to India. Belong to India, if that direct from Burma will be stealing, it should spread from India. So I'm happy that Goenka has gone back to India. Now you see that plant planted on India and it will spread from India like anything. And then he prayed that I will not be alive to see. But you will see that Buddhas will be throughout the world, it will spread.
First day, I started from the beginning. I had to go with him for typing and correspondence. Like this circular was made. He started that I am here teaching Vipassana course. He had given me permission to teach Vipassana. If you are interested, there will be a course in July. When he is traveling, I go with him. So everything, all this stationery, I took with me and my typewriter portable. He used to train second class, not first class, because Mataji was not there, just only him and me going all over India. This was the first bit of it, yes. This was the first course, and the place was Panchayati Wadi, July 3 to 30. First page started with surname Mr. Adukia. This is Mr. Natwarlal Parikh, who attended the 55th course of India. Mrs. Parikh was 1976. She attended the next course.
Goenkaji's role in bringing Dhamma out of Burma and to India was a very delicate one, because in fact Buddhism in India is in some quarters quite reviled. Rather than a legend or history or mythology of respect for a great Indian teacher, instead the religious teachers of that time began to talk down Buddha and his teaching. It's odd. You'll go to various places in India and you may find that they retain a statue of Buddha, an idol of the Buddha. They say the Buddha is part of their pantheon of gods. He's one of the reincarnations of Vishnu or something. But at the same time they'll say, but don't follow his teaching. No, that's bad. So now Goenkaji comes and he's starting to teach in India. He didn't call it Buddhism, as we know. He used the word Dhamma. Dhamma or Dharma is a very respected word in Indian language. By getting people to meditate, began to show them that what the Buddha was teaching was not something to be reviled at all. But he had to do this little by little. It was hard to convince Indians of this. And in time, they came to see it. So many times, Goenkaji would set up for a course and you find, oh, it's on a very busy street, the train is running right by there, right behind the Dhamma hall, and out there, right on the street, there are people selling chai, selling bidis. There's almost like a market going on. So this was the constant battle, trying to find a way to teach people when you had way less than ideal conditions. This is one of the reasons that Sayagyi encouraged one of the few Indians who were students of Goenkaji's, who came to Burma to meet Sayagyi before he died, to go back to Bombay and start an organization, start a trust, and get a center where Goenkaji can really teach. It's only then that the Dhamma will get really well established. So that was Sri Ram Taparya. He went back and he did that. He started the Dhammagiri Trust, and they set about trying to find land and raised the money and bought the land and got the center started.
We heard on Metta Day, somebody was saying that, Guruji was looking some place for meditation center. So myself and Bhojaraji went to Guruji and requested Guruji, so while you are going to Bombay, we have few places in mind, in Igatpuri. Few mango trees were there, all just like a barren land. Somebody asked, we heard that you are looking some place. So he said, no, the place was looking for us. After some years, we came to know that while Guruji was traveling in the train, passing through Igatpuri, many times he was, coming out train looking at these waterfalls, beautiful mountains and greenery. And after some time he told that he was thinking that, suppose if we had a place like, Igatpuri for our center, how wonderful it would be.
Two bungalows, a shed, and a big storage go-down. There's no electricity, there's no water. The place is infested with insects, scorpions, snakes, centipedes, and Graham's living there in one of the bungalows in one of the rooms. And if you want water, there's a well at the bottom of the hill. You go down there and bring back buckets of water, candles. So, I asked, so what are we doing here? And he said, well, Goenkaji said, just meditate. So that's what we're doing, just meditate. But half of our time was consumed in keeping ourselves alive because we have to cook, we have to go down to the village and shop, we have to bring up water.
We did the registration, we served in the hall, we supervised the workers, we counted the cement bags and weighed them, how much had been pinched on the way. I mean, you heard a truck at night, you jump up because it's a truck. So either it brings water or it brings cement or it brings something. So it's sort of all around us.
And we did a 3-day self-course in the cave. And on our way back from the cave, we saw these huts. As you come through Tingawari Valley, we saw these huts, and the trust was in the process of building the big long accommodation, the bungalows. And so I said to him, right, it'd be great if we could have some huts like this. So we spoke to the trust, and they agreed. So we made 2 circles of huts.
Every villager knows how to make a hut. So why don't we engage some of the local villagers to come, and you just make a mud platform, cover it with rough stone tiles, and put up these wattle walls of reeds, pack them with mud, and put a palm leaf roof on it, and you have accommodation. So I think by the time I had come back that fall, there were 2 circles of these huts.
And whenever there was a Metta day, so many Igatpuri people used to come and visit the Megiri. And they will go around and say, where is your teacher? Where is your guru? They were looking for. And Guruji used to mix with the students that time. He wasn't just sitting in the residence. And he will himself say, oh, here I am. I'm standing. I'm not any different guru, I'm just the family man, just as you are. So, and here is my wife is also with me. I'm not nobody like a long beard and something different. I'm also a human being like you. I'm not different. And he just gives example like as he is. It was really great experience for Igatpuri people also. They never found any Babas or Guru like that.
I went to Dhammagiri in the fall of '76. I think I started off in the office. I knew my way around a typewriter keyboard a little bit. Very, very early, he was revising the Code of Discipline. It had existed, I think, from his very early days. He had written it himself, and he wanted to revise it. And because I wasn't afraid to sit at a typewriter, I got involved in doing that. And then there were letters sometimes to do for him. From there it continued.
Yeah, so then Goenka ji gave, when he was here, he said, okay, you have this pit duck, and then when I come back, I think in May, we have a little ceremony and we put this foundation stone. We all gathered around that hole. Then Mr. Bodrat from Igatpuri, who had found this site, he had brought a coconut and flowers, and he wanted some really nice ceremony. So Goenka ji, actually, they did break the coconut, but he wasn't too happy with it because he really wanted to have the pure teaching and not have any standard ceremony involved with that, because then somebody might take offense or somebody might say this is important. Then every center we have to start off with all these blessings and ceremonies and coconuts and stuff like that. As he said, leave every rite and ritual behind. Not to condemn it, but here we don't do that. And I think that was the main reason.
David Young was a meditator from New Zealand who actually served on my first course. And he was charged with starting to build the initial pagoda, which was much smaller than what you see at Dhammagiri now. And so there was a group of Westerners that would work with him, and he was a carpenter, quite a skilled carpenter, and we would all get out there in the relentless sun and work in pretty atrocious conditions. And it was really hot, heavy work, and all the scaffolding was made out of bamboo and string. But we were young and we loved it. We were having a great time, and it was the Dhamma, and Goenka ji was coming. Those early days at Dhammagiri were really very memorable and very, very special.
Goenka ji always talked about this prediction of the Dhamma going from Burma to India and from India to spread around the world. And all of these people from different places, from all the countries, they took it back. So that vision, that hope was always, let's have courses in the West, let's have courses in the West. And there were a couple of teachers that sat with Sayagyi that started to teach some courses. It was Mr. Hover in California, there was John Coleman in England.
And Ruth Dennison. I think just those three did conduct in the West, and they conducted because Goenkaji said to his students, you're going back to America, you go to Robert Hover and invite him to conduct a course, organize a course for him. Same thing for John Coleman, and I believe the same thing for Ruth Dennison. So we felt it as our task to bring it to other countries and to our own countries.
From mid-69 through 70, there were no Westerners. And then after that, the word really started to spread. And I went to Goenkaji and I asked him, I had an idea that I'm seeing these Westerners and they don't know each other. When they go back to their country, they could contact each other and they could sit together. Could I note their names by country and their addresses and then maybe contact them? So Goenkaji said, yes, go ahead. During that year, Bill Corselius was also working up this idea about a newsletter. This list actually became the data that we started off with, and the newsletter took off. So the first 9 years were eclectic and with all sorts of articles, and were very personal actually in some of the things that were noted in there.
Oak Tree House was a Vipassana community that was got together by some meditators who came back from India. And it was an idyllic, thatched 16th century house. There was 6 acres of landscape garden, and we had an acre of vegetables. And I think anywhere between 15 and 30 people used to live there. So that was the base of Vipassana in the UK in those days. And somebody offered if I wanted to manage a course for John Coleman. I have no idea how many courses we held for John, but it was probably 5 or 6 courses, maybe more.
Goenkaji, he had a Burmese passport, which he treasured very, very much, because this was his motherland, and they had given him permission to come to India when nobody else was allowed. So he was very careful, and as a mark of respect, he wanted to keep this Burmese passport. Then he had promised some French lady who had been really insisting that please come to the West, come to the West. So he said he had promised that he would come. In 10 years, I will go to the West. So 10 years was nearing its end, and he still had a Burmese passport, and she said, you promised? And he said, yes, I promised, and I will keep my promise. And it was a very short switch over that he said, okay, I've asked the Burmese government so many times, they don't endorse it, I change my nationality.
I went with Goenkaji. When Goenkaji first went abroad, 2 in France, then we went to Canada, and then after coming back, 2 in England. So total 5. The invitation had come from one yoga organization. Tara was part of that, and Tara had done only 1 course, and she invited. And Goenkaji said, this is the opportunity, and somebody is asking, we should go. All the meditators were there, except in France, we had little bit difficulty with the French people. Even somebody will kiss Mataji, and that, very interesting, the culture difference. Okay. When we went there, they had arranged the rooms for us, but couple in 1 room. They have arranged everything before we went. So Goenkaji said, no, you have to change.
And the people walked in and suddenly were confronted with the discipline that was expected of them, silence and segregation of men and women. And it was wild, I have to say. I was sort of desperately trying to keep things in line. My job was to ring the gong, and people resented that. I would leave it on a nail outside the meditation hall. One day somebody moved it so that the nail was high up out of my reach. So I went to the kitchen and got the top of a pot and a spoon and went out round with that. Every day I would see things that were shocking for me, you know, somebody giving another person a massage in the meditation hall. One evening there was a couple out on the lawn doing ballet at 10 p.m. or something like that. And so I would keep going to Goenkaji and saying, Goenkaji, this is happening. Goenkaji, they're doing this. Goenkaji, He just smiled and looked off as he would usually do. This was his attitude, just accept. This is the situation and be equanimous with it. We can't change it.
And I think the one in Switzerland was canceled and we heard about it. So we immediately phoned and said, come to Montreal, we'll pay the ticket, we'll find a place. So he agreed to come to Montreal. So we organized a course in Montreal. That was the first course in North America, and people came from all over. All the old students came from California, Florida, different places,
And there was Jean-Claude, he was a French filmmaker, and he actually videoed that first course.
There was a pilgrimage by train to Bodh Gaya and some of the other places associated with the Buddha. And as we were on the train coming to Bodh Gaya, Goenka called me into his compartment and he said, Bill, I'd like you to be an assistant teacher. And my response was, oh, certainly, Guruji. I've often regretted those words. And then, once the course was fixed, then Goenka announced that I had been appointed an assistant teacher and would be conducting a course. I don't remember the announcement, I just know I came out of my room one day and suddenly everybody knew. And everybody was relating to me differently, and it felt really hard. I felt really exposed. I felt people immediately looked at me, thought of me in a different way, and had expectations of my meeting a certain standard that, I still inside felt quite a beginner.
At the end of that pilgrimage, after going to all the places, Bill Hart was left with the job of conducting the first assistant teacher-led course in Bodh Gaya. And I remember seeing that Bill had almost nothing to conduct that course with. And it just impressed me about how difficult that would be to represent my teacher and try to conduct a course like he did. So on the way back to Bombay, I talked to Goenka several times and asked him, what about letting me record these courses next summer when you come to the States? And at first he said, no, let's don't do that. That'll disturb everybody. And the students will get all bad results as of it. And I kept saying, well, no, I'll be like a little mouse and I'll set the camera really low and it won't distract anybody. And he finally said yes. So I arranged all the equipment, went to the camp area in Northern California, and we recorded that course, both in audio and video. And that was the beginning. And after that, I went back to India every winter and carried equipment, recorded there all winter, followed him around all summer when he was in the States and recorded in English and so forth, and began the process of preparing tapes so that the assistant teachers could conduct the courses just as he did.
This was the very first course conducted by an assistant teacher, the very first 10-day course. And Goenka had said that giving a course is like taking an adhitthana. It's making a strong determination. I will do this and I will carry through to the end. So, when a teacher undertakes a course, he or she is making that strong determination. And Goenka said to us, if everybody leaves, doesn't matter, you continue. If you do a self-course and continue to the end. So we started off and, the first evening played Anapana, and then day one, it was all new and it was all an adventure. Anyway, the first day passed pretty much like the first day of any course, and in the evening, I turned on the discourse and felt, okay, now I can relax. This is what I always feel when the discourse plays, okay, now they have Goenka. And then after the discourse, there was a break and they came back in the hall and it was time for the final sitting. And now I pressed the play button to continue. And there was just a hissing sound, nothing else, silence. There was nothing on the tape. And Goenka had said, any time that the tapes fail, you have to step in just like that. You must be ready to do it. So here it was, day one, and I had to be ready to give the instruction. And so the first thing I was asking myself was, okay, what is the instruction? But anyway, I recalled it, and I gave the instruction. So 9 o'clock came, and so I did it. I chanted Bhavatu Sabba Mangalam as best I could. But what was so amazing was that as soon as I started doing it, it was a wave of, the whole description, just vibration, vibration, vibration. That made me feel that I wasn't there alone. This is something important for assistant teachers to feel. The danger is that we feel, I am doing this. And so in that case, you're doing it with your own limitations. Bill Hart, so much and no more, with his own ego and with his own perceptions. But if you can just set that aside and realize, I'm just here representing my teacher, nothing else, then it's a really powerful experience and really inspiring experience.
Goenkaji called us in and said, I'd like you to serve as ATs. And both of us said, look, we're just not, with all respect, we're not, because we're looking at Goenkaji, who's a Dhamma teacher, he's a real Dhamma teacher. Who are we? We're just, gosh, we manage courses. And he said, well, how can you repay your debt to your teacher? So you can't argue with Goenkaji. So we said, all right. So we started conducting courses. At the beginning, Goenkaji wanted ATs to start giving instructions to lead into giving discourses. He wanted the tradition to continue in that way. And so on some of the early courses, we did give instructions, not as well as Goenkaji by any means, but what he started seeing was that variations were creeping in. And I think it was one of the best things he ever did to say, look, we're just going to use the tapes. That's the resource now that people come back to, because everybody's got their own slight interpretation, a slight different emphasis. So even though there was quite a bit of criticism, people say, well, ATs are just pushing buttons, what are they doing? I don't mind. I'd rather people get the Dhamma, get it clearly in the skillful way that Goenkaji presents it. So, yeah.
You'd go to North America, Canada, California, and 1 year Chicago. And there was a course that we managed and put together in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Sandwich, Massachusetts. And we really went under that year, because you wanted to make it a Dhamma course, and we're going, ooh, okay. And people didn't get the idea of Dhamma at that stage. So we were a little short of money. And he said, it's time. It's time to look for a center.
He said, I have time. Let's do something. Let's go look for a center. We drove around to a lot of places. Some of them he wouldn't get out of the car. And we just kept showing him places. So finally we showed him this place. I had my daughter in the car, who was 3 years old at the time. So we pulled up to this place and she jumped out first. She said, oh, let's buy this place. It has a swimming pool, which is what we filled in there. So Goenkaji started walking around, and we walked up to where the pagoda is, and he said, oh, this is a good place for a pagoda. He said, this is a really good place, so let's try to put an offer in on it. We put an offer in, and we bought it. So this was the first center outside of India that there were courses on.
This is June, and by August we had a center. That's how quickly it happened. And that's when Damodar started.
In the early days, we only had this one house at Damodar. And so our first course, I think, was for one person, actually, served by 2. And then the next course, I think there were 4, and then there were 6, and then there were, so it sort of exponentially grew. When we started in India, we were cheek by jowl. We were sleeping right next to each other. And so we continued that tradition at Damodar. And we had the rooms filled with mattresses, people sleeping right next to each other. And it didn't seem weird then. It was perfectly okay to do that.
It was a very cold, bitter mountain winter. We had to build the entire center from scratch. There was nothing there. no utilities, nothing. There was just bush, there were no structures on it.
We asked Goenka what is the priority when we're starting the centre. And he said the same as what he said with Dhammagiri. The meditation is the #1 priority, and he hoped that we could have continuous meditation as soon as possible. Because there was no management guide, nothing to tell us what should be done and what shouldn't be done. It's difficult to create that kind of pure environment in a new place where it was just bare land.
Even today, it's hard to understand it, but it is growing, and it will grow a lot more, I'm sure. But I do remember Goenka in his first discourse is always saying that Dhamma will go to every village. We'll have centers in all the villages, throughout the world, every town throughout the world. And I did not say it wasn't going to happen, but I hadn't, obviously Goenka could see something happening that I did not. I just said, well, we'll see.
When the internet came along, I knew that was going to explode the entire ability to spread the word to people. In about 96, I started the first Dhamma.org website. Kind of taught myself HTML programming and took our basic materials and converted them to a web-based material and put them up. As things have progressed along, it's kind of grown into a much more sophisticated thing. We get hundreds of thousands of hits a day. Almost all of our registrations are done via the internet, but the internet just opened the door to a global communication and contact with people making available our courses, and it's happened.
So I was sitting this course, and after the course I was in a tent, and Bill Crecilius came in, who I didn't know from Hot Rock at that time. Bill sticks his head in the tent and he says, "Are you Harry Snyder?" "Yeah, I'm Harry Snyder." "Are you an attorney?" "Yeah, I'm an attorney." "Well, we're talking about forming a trust. Would you be willing to come and talk with Goenka about this?" I said, "Okay, that's what I do." And then I would get calls from him. "Well, Harry, there's going to be the 2000 Millennium World Summit in New York at the United Nations, and we think Goenka's invited. Take care of it." Okay. So I had a contact at the Interfaith Center in New York, who was a good friend who was actually a Goenka meditator as well. So we're at the United Nations, and it's this long morning and afternoon before Goenka's going to wrap up this discussion on conversions. And almost all of the speakers were saying, "Please stop this conversion. This is ruining our culture. It's not just about religion. It's about people being confused and people fighting with each other. Please leave off the conversion." So then Goenka gets up and he talks.
So much has been said about conversion, for conversion and against conversion. I am for conversion. I'm not against conversion. But conversion not from one organized religion to another organized religion. No. Conversion from misery to happiness. When I generate peace in my mind, the entire atmosphere around me gets permeated with the vibration of peace. Anybody who comes in contact with me starts enjoying peace. This is the real conversion which is necessary, nothing else.
It was really a miraculous moment. Before that, I'd asked Goenka, "What are you going to talk about?" He said, "Oh, I've worked something out." And he'd written out this whole thing the night before.
To say that Vipassana has become the basis of the life is an understatement. It has to become the whole life. And Goenka has provided us with that example. Here's a man who went from quite angry businessman to somebody who changed the arc of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of lives, because he's given something so simple, so tangible that people can do for themselves. He was a great man. So I'm fortunate, I feel really happy to have met him, knowing that it's still a really long path.
When we first started serving on courses in the West, we felt like we were definitely aiding Goenka. We were his hands, because obviously, and he said so many times, I only have 2 hands, you're the 1,000 hands, and we definitely felt like that. This is some way that we can repay back our debt of gratitude to him by helping and serving so many people in so many ways. And we really did do everything. I mean, in the early days, we were managing, we were cooking, we were cleaning the toilets, we were doing absolutely everything. And though we were exhausted half the time, usually it was with a lot of joy and a lot of gratitude. So it wasn't a hardship for us, it was just absolutely joyful.